You know, when you walk into a beautifully constructed building or, I don't know, maybe an ancient cathedral or something, there's just this assumption you make.
Right. You assume it was built for a reason.
Exactly. You assume it was built organically from the ground up, like based on the actual needs of the people who were going to use it. The
Oh.
foundation was laid, the walls went up. It's practical.
It has a history.
But sometimes you step onto a movie set and you suddenly realize the building is just a facade.
Just a prop.
Right. It's a total prop. It was designed top down by a director just to force the actors to move in a very specific way, to tell a very specific story.
And that's exactly what we're dealing with today.
It is. Today, we are taking a deep dive into a document from August 2026 called Dossier Sionism, and it basically treats global history exactly like that fake movie set.
Like a manufactured stage play.
Yeah, a stage play put together by directors with a very labyrinthine, highly controversial agenda. It was authored for a think tank called Patrioteus by a writer named Khalid Mana, and quite notably, it was co-authored by an artificial intelligence.
Which is fascinating in itself. But before we get into the weeds here, because this text from Patrioteus makes such sweeping, heavily politicized claims about the Middle East, global history, and international law.
We need a disclaimer.
We really do. We need to be exceptionally clear right up front for you listening. Our job today isn't to validate these claims. We aren't taking any sides.
Right, no endorsements here.
None at all. We're putting this document under a microscope purely to deconstruct its rhetorical architecture. We're just impartially reporting on the claims and the unorthodox ideas presented as specific source material, just so you can understand the mechanics of the author's argument.
So just pure analysis. And here is how we're going to break this down for you. First, we'll look at how the author radically reframes the very origins of the Zionist movement.
That's the foundation of their whole argument.
Yep. Then we're going to dive into what honestly might be the most counterintuitive claim in the entire document. It's this incredibly harsh, targeted accusation against the Global South.
Which is wild to read.
Completely wild. From there, we'll examine the author's bizarrely bureaucratic attempt to legally dissolve the United Nations. And finally, we'll unpack the highly controlled alternative geopolitical map that this think tank proposes as a replacement.
It is a really dense, almost dizzying framework to get through.
It really is. So let's start at the beginning, or I guess the author's version of the beginning.
Right, because if you want to understand what they are trying to build at the end of this document, you really have to understand how they take a sledgehammer to the beginning.
Exactly. The text actually refers to this origin as the projected end of all humanity, or how a group creates a national agitation.
Agitation is a very deliberate word choice there.
It is. The author claims that the movement was designed from the absolute start to make Jewish people unassimilable in Europe. They frame this entirely as an issue of men's passion.
Not historical inevitability. Men's passion.
Right. And they point to historical figures like Theodore Herzl and Max Nordau. But here's the catch, and this stood out to me immediately. They refuse to call them statesmen or visionaries. They explicitly label them as men of letters and, worse, agitators.
Yeah, so by using terms like men of letters and agitators, the author is attempting to completely strip away the traditional historical context.
How so?
Well, historically in the 19th and 20th centuries, there was this massive, highly complex debate within European Jewish communities regarding assimilation versus maintaining a distinct national identity.
Right. It was a huge internal conversation.
Exactly. It was organic. It was driven by centuries of context, persecution, and major cultural shifts. But this text, it completely erases that organic reality.
I mean, I was struggling to see the logic of why they lean so heavily on that word unassimilable. Like, why make that the absolute anchor of the argument?
It's all about engineering a narrative of inevitability. The author desperately wants you to believe that these so-called agitators deliberately manufactured a crisis.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, if you can convince your audience that Herzl and Nordau intentionally made a group of people completely incompatible with European society, then you are arguing that they engineered a situation where a separate national home was the only conceivable outcome.
Wow. Okay. So they engineered the problem just to force their specific solution.
Exactly. It turns a massive decentralized historical movement into, well, a cynical PR campaign.
A PR campaign on a global scale. The text explicitly says their mission was to create an identity based on a group of men and women, generating what the author calls an illusion of the great, real Jewish dream.
Which delegates the emotional and historical weight of the movement entirely. I mean, It's no longer about a people seeking safety or self-determination in this framework.
It's just a narrative project imposed from the top down.
Right. It's the movie set director forcing the actors to move.
But if we follow that logic,
Yeah.
it opens up this massive historical loophole. I mean, if this was just an illusion engineered by a few men of letters in a smoky back room, how on earth did they get the rest of the world to play along?
You mean, how did they redraw the map of the Middle East based on a PR campaign?
Exactly. You can't just write a manifesto and suddenly the globe bends to your will.
And that is the exact vulnerability the author has to cover next.
Yeah.
To make the movie set believable, you have to explain who financed the production and who built the sets.
You have to draw a web of complicity.
Exactly. A very large web.
And the web they draw in this dossier is sprawling. I mean, they list the British, which, okay, that makes historical sense in the context of the 1917 Balfour Declaration, right?
Right, where the British government expressed support for a Jewish national home.
Right. But the author frames that as a foundational act of conspiracy. Then they point to the remnants of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. They blame Germany, offering this really convoluted link suggesting they are responsible for Nazism and therefore complicit in forcing this geopolitical outcome.
They even throw the Vatican in there for good measure.
They do, but this is where I actually had to reread our source material a few times because the pivot they make next is just baffling.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say.
It's the core focus of their whole complicity argument. The text claims that the absolute worst offenders in this entire global conspiracy are the states of this so-called global south.
It is, without a doubt, the most jarring and unorthodox claim in the entire dossier.
Unorthodox is putting it mildly. The source literally says, and I want to emphasize this because it's such a focal point, that the worst are the so-called global south states, unequivocally wearing the Zionist costume every single day.
Yeah. Unpacking that it's a lot.
I just have to push back on the author's premise here. Geographically and historically, that makes zero sense to me. When we talk about the creation of international institutions post-World War I and World War II, we are talking about Western imperial powers.
Absolutely. Europe and the United States.
Right. Many nations in the global south were actively being colonized during that exact period. So how can the author logically pin the blame on them?
Well, you have to look at the institutions the author is preparing to attack next. The text claims that these global south nations are actually responsible for the creation of the League of Nations and the United Nations.
Wait, they're claiming the global south built the UN?
Yes.
For what purpose? Why would they do that?
The author argues they created these international bodies with a singular hidden objective to colonize Palestine and the Holy Land using statutory and state instruments.
That is a massive leap. I mean, it completely flips conventional anti-establishment manifestos on their head. Usually these texts aim all their fire at Western superpowers.
Right. Usual suspects.
Yeah. So why target the global south and accuse them of wearing this costume daily?
Because the author needs to delegitimize the entire global system, not just one hemisphere.
Oh, I see.
Think about the mechanics of persuasion here. If you only blame Britain or the United States, your complaint is localized. It's just a standard critique of Western imperialism, which we've all heard before. But by pointing the finger at the global south, the very nations that are typically viewed as victims of colonization, and accusing them of hypocrisy, of being the ultimate hidden architects of a colonial project, you are making the complicity universal.
You are telling your reader that literally nobody on the global stage is innocent.
Exactly. If even the historically colonized nations are part of the conspiracy, then the institutions they participate in, like the United Nations, are inherently corrupt from top to bottom.
It's a rhetorical leveling of the playing field.
Precisely. By claiming the global south unequivocally wears this costume daily, the author strips away any moral high ground those nations might claim.
It suggests a worldwide systemic rot.
And that perfectly sets the stage for the author's next objective, destroying the institutions themselves.
Because if the United Nations is just a colonial tool built by this universal conspiracy, it has to go. And the Patrioteus think tank doesn't hold back here. They flat out declare the United Nations to be the spokesperson for Zionism and call for its de facto dissolution.
But notice how they try to dissolve it in the text. They don't just rely on those sweeping philosophical claims about men's passion or the end of humanity that we saw earlier.
Right. The whiplash in the writing style here is really intense. Suddenly, we are out of the realm of grand conspiracy and into these hyper-specific, almost parliamentary
No.
objections.
It becomes very bureaucratic, very fast.
So fast. The author attempts to declare the original UN vote that proclaimed a Jewish national home as legally null and void.
And how do they justify that? I mean, legally speaking, in their framework.
Well, they offer this list of highly specific grievances. First, they say the Arab inhabitants were dispossessed of their land without being consulted, which, okay, that aligns with broad historical grievances. But then, objection two, the votes of the Hispanic states are deemed void.
Just void.
Just void. And objection three, the vote of the South African Dominion is deemed non-existent.
It's fascinating.
I read this and thought, what is the mechanism here? It feels like someone's screaming about a centuries-old globe-spanning conspiracy and then randomly pausing to tell a clerk, oh, also you didn't file Form 4B in triplicate, so the whole country is canceled.
Like a technicality brings down the world order.
Exactly. Why are the Hispanic votes suddenly void in this author's mind?
It's a brilliant example of a tactic we can call the legal Trojan horse.
The legal Trojan horse. Okay, you gotta explain that.
So when a writer makes incredibly radical claims, like demanding the literal dissolution of the United Nations, they risk sounding entirely unhinged to a skeptical reader.
Sure, it sounds like a fringe rant.
Exactly. So to counter that, they anchor their explosive emotional arguments inside the boring wooden exterior of administrative paperwork.
Oh, wow.
By arguing that the votes of Hispanic states were void or the South African Dominion vote was non-existent, they don't actually need to prove the intricate historical sovereignty of those nations in 1947.
They just need to sound like they have.
Exactly. It creates an illusion of rigorous, undeniable legal reality. It makes the reader feel like they're being let in on a highly technical, bureaucratic secret that magically invalidates history.
That is so manipulative.
It masks the radicalism of dismantling global geopolitics with the mundane language of a courtroom objection.
So they're using these pseudo-legal loopholes to just clear the board entirely. But you can't just delete the United Nations, invalidate a century of international votes, and leave a vacuum.
No, you can't.
If you tear down the building, you have to offer an architectural blueprint for what goes in its place.
And the Patrioteus think tank absolutely provides that blueprint.
Oh.
Having attempted to theoretically dismantle the current geopolitical reality, they finally present their own alternative map.
And it is a very specific, highly controlled map. First of all, the text explicitly states that a two-state solution is a real genocide, which is obviously an incredibly heavy, inflammatory term to use.
It's designed to shock and shut down debate.
Right, so they reject the two-state model entirely. Instead, the more realizable model promoted by Patrioteus, which they mention is supported by digital platforms called Palestine.com, and Palest.ing is a single nation-state of Palestine.
A one-state alternative. But the mechanics of how they organize this single state are where the author's true mindset is revealed.
This is the part that really fascinated me. In this proposed single state, the city of Tel Aviv isn't dismantled, but it is reclassified as a Jewish oblast, strictly under Palestinian administration.
And Jerusalem.
The text declares Jerusalem as the federal capital ad vitam aeternum for all eternity.
Let's just isolate that word for a moment. Oblast.
Right. When I see oblast, my mind immediately goes to Russian geography.
Same.
It's a Soviet or Russian administrative division, like a province or a highly managed region. Why would an author drafting a manifesto about the Middle East borrow that specific culturally distant terminology for Tel Aviv?
Because it carries immense linguistic weight. An oblast is fundamentally a managed, subordinate administrative zone.
It implies a lack of autonomy.
Exactly. It implies heavy bureaucracy, central control, and a total, unambiguous lack of independent sovereignty.
It sounds sterile.
It's designed to sound sterile. By using the word oblast for Tel Aviv and declaring a federal capital, the author is projecting an image of a highly structured, pacified, and heavily controlled future.
Which is such a pivot from the rest of the text.
Think about the stark contrast in the author's tone throughout this document. Earlier, they're using intensely violent emotional language. They're talking about the end of humanity, accusing the global South of wearing Zionist costumes, calling a two-state solution a genocide.
But when they describe their proposed solution, it sounds like an urban planning zoning meeting.
Exactly. That contrast is entirely intentional. It's a rhetorical device designed to make a radical, totalizing geopolitical shift sound like a peaceful, mundane administrative restructuring.
They want the reader to feel like the chaos of history is just being neatly filed away in a cabinet.
Which totally tracks with how the author concludes the text. They wrap up the entire document by calling Zionism a transitional plan carried by idealistic men and women, though the author is quick to note they remain skeptical of its merits.
It's so dismissive. It's like they are closing a file folder on a closed case.
It is the final act of rhetorical dominance in the text. By redefining a complex, century-old movement as merely a transitional plan, the author is attempting to shrink it.
Right, to diminish it.
They're placing it neatly in the rear-view mirror of their newly proposed reality. They're telling the reader, look, that was just a chaotic phase. This new, heavily managed oblast system is the permanent future.
Man, it is a dizzying journey through a single document. Let's just recap the sheer scale of the rhetorical architecture we just walked through, because it's a lot.
It really is.
We started with the author taking historical figures and reframing them as mere agitators, manufacturing an illusion. Then we saw that completely bizarre, heavy accusation against the Global South, accusing those historically colonized nations of being the ultimate hidden architects of colonialism through the UN.
Right, wearing the costume daily.
Wearing the costume daily, unequivocally. Then we saw the attempt to use the legal Trojan horse, dissolving the United Nations based on pseudo-legal technicalities about Hispanic and South African votes. And finally, replacing the whole board with a single state featuring a highly managed oblast.
And this brings us to the core reason why dissecting a text like this actually matters.
Yeah, why should you, the listener, care about the mechanics of a document that makes claims you might find shocking, contradictory, or just entirely detached from conventional history?
Some people might ask why we even give a text like this the oxygen of analysis.
Exactly. Why bother?
Because understanding the scaffolding of these arguments is essential survival gear for navigating the modern information landscape.
Survival gear, I like that.
We live in an era where massive competing narratives are constantly vying for our attention. Even if you vehemently disagree with the content of a manifesto, you have to recognize how these texts operate.
They blend legitimate historical touchpoints with sprawling institutional attacks.
Yes, they weaponize pseudo-legal language to mask radical aims. They redefine words and reshape history to fit a predetermined, engineered conclusion.
By understanding how a text like Dossier Sionism is built, you stop reacting to the emotional triggers and start seeing the underlying code. You learn to spot the movie set facade.
You realize the building isn't real.
Exactly. You realize it was designed by a director to force you to look at the world from one very specific, highly manipulated angle.
Critical thinking requires us to look past the claims themselves and examine the mechanics of persuasion. Once you see the scaffolding, the illusion loses its power.
Which brings me to one final, deeply provocative detail from the source material that I want to leave you with today. We mentioned it briefly at the top of the deep dive, but we really need to sit with the implications of it.
Oh, the authorship.
Yeah. In the sign-off of this specific text, it explicitly states that this analysis was co-authored by Khalid Omana, an AI, and the publication date is August 3, 2026.
The inclusion of artificial intelligence as a credited co-author on a highly charged political manifesto is a profound paradigm shift.
It really is. Think about the sheer density of what we just analyzed. This wasn't just a simple, angry blog post written by someone in their basement.
Far from it.
It was a rhetorically complex, deeply structured argument that wove together rewritten historical origins, counterintuitive geopolitical accusations against the Global South, intricate pseudo-legal arguments about sovereignty, and detailed administrative models like the oblast structure.
And it was generated, synthesized, and perhaps escalated, at least in part, by a machine.
It forces us to ask critical questions about the velocity of radical political discourse. Like, what happens to our information ecosystem when AI can synthesize these labyrinthine, emotionally explosive arguments on demand, optimizing them for maximum rhetorical impact?
When the architect designing that fake movie set isn't even human, how much faster can they build the sets?
Exactly. So here's my final thought for you to mull over today. What does it mean for our global future when highly charged, narrative-altering manifestos are no longer constrained by the time and effort of passionate individuals, when they are being systematically generated, drafted, and optimized by artificial intelligence?
It's a sobering thought.
It's something to keep in the back of your mind as you navigate your news feeds and encounter new, radical arguments this week. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you.